Hi, my name is Christina Hampton, the Manager of Collections and Special Projects here at the St. Louis Science Center. Thank you for joining me for another exciting virtual tour of the collections. The Science Center Collections has over 100,000 amazing artifacts. These artifacts and specimens document the region's natural and technological history, and they're also artifacts of cultural and historical importance. The foundation of the collection was really built on the desire to learn more about the natural world and the world around us. So natural history specimens were some of the first artifacts collected. On this tour, we'll take a closer look at some of those specimens in natural history in our zoology category. The Science Center has a wide variety of zoological artifacts and specimens. Zoology is the branch of biology which studies the animal kingdom, including the behavior, the structure, physiology, classification, and distribution of animals, both living and extinct. We have examples of animals that live on land, that swim in the seas, and that soar through the skies. The zoology category is further divided into subcategories in order to separate these different animals by type. For those animals that live on land, we have about 100 mammals of all shapes and sizes, as well as about 100 reptiles and amphibians. For those animals that inhabit the oceans, lakes, and rivers, we have nearly 100 fish specimens and more than 9,000 invertebrate specimens. Invertebrates refers to those animals that do not have a backbone. Additionally, there are over 2,000 various insect specimens. For those animals that soar, we have about 550 bird specimens as well as about 600 eggs. And finally, we have a collection of about 300 animal bones, skulls, and skeletons that include examples from a variety of different animals. First thing you see when you walk into the collection storage area are the mammals. It's pretty hard to ignore when right in front of you is this grizzly and the other large animals. Among our larger mammal friends are a couple polar bears, an immature polar bear and a full-grown adult, as well as a few sheep and an ibex. Some specimens that you may find surprising include a leopard and a puma, an okapi, and a western lowland gorilla. And of course, we have our grizzly bear friend, which some of you may find familiar. For over 40 years, she greeted guests to the Museum of Westward Expansion under the St. Louis Arch. When renovations began there for a new museum, she needed a new place to call home, and so she came here. Other than the grizzly and polar bears, we have 4 other impressive bears standing watch over collections. 2 varieties of black bear, and 2 large Alaskan brown bears. One of the brown bears is currently on display in the Artifacts of Wonder exhibit. We have quite the variety of smaller mammal friends as well, ranging from more common critters like beavers, mice, foxes, and chipmunks to some more unusual mammals. Several specimens are animals that you could find right in your own backyard, such as an opossum, raccoons, rabbits, squirrels, and skunks. The more unusual mammals include a vampire bat from a cave in Mexico, an American badger from the western United States, 2 duck-billed platypus from far-off Australia, a kinkajou from the tropical forests of Nicaragua in Central America, a wolverine from the Arctic regions of Alaska, and this adorable 3-toed sloth, the world's slowest moving mammal found in the rainforests of Central and South America. The examples of reptiles and amphibians in the collections include various snakes, turtles, frogs, and lizards. Turtle specimens account for more than half of the specimens in this subcategory. There are small examples like snapping turtles, 3-toed box turtles, midland painted turtles, and softshell turtles. Additionally, there are some larger examples like the Atlantic hawksbill turtles and a Galapagos tortoiseshell. Many of the snake examples we have are reproduction molds, but we also have real specimens, such as this northern copperhead, this water python skin, and this large reticulated python. The lizard specimens include spectacled caimans, iguanas, and Texas horned lizards. One of the few examples of amphibians that we have in the collections is this abnormal four-armed frog. The extra arms are a result of a parasitic flatworm which infests the digestive system of tadpoles. This causes any affected frogs to grow extra limbs as a result, or none at all. Frogs with extra legs are easier for predators to catch, such as birds. In fact, the parasite's preferred home is the esophagus of birds. This is where the parasite can reproduce. The collections includes a wide range of fish specimens, both freshwater and saltwater species. We have large fiberglass mounts like this small-toothed sawfish and blue marlin. We have a mako shark and the hammerhead sharks, which you can see in the discovery room. And there are also strange-looking fish, such as the flying fish and the spiny porcupine fish. There are a good number of cute little seahorses, and there are also fish that could end up on the dinner table, like the salmon and trout. We also have a fish on the critically endangered list, the fast-swimming bluefin tuna. And we have some fish with teeth, like the barracuda and this terrifying piranha. Piranhas are a freshwater fish found in South America that have earned quite the bad reputation. This bad reputation largely comes from Teddy Roosevelt, who encountered them in South America in 1913 and told a story about them devouring a cow. While piranhas are aggressive, they're not usually aggressive towards humans. In fact, piranhas will only go after large animals or humans if they're already dead or dying. They do bite with a lot of force, but if they bite humans, they would usually only go for the toes or the feet. Invertebrates are those animals that do not have a backbone. This includes mollusks, coral, sponges, crabs, sea stars, and snails, as well as insects, although the insects form a separate subcategory in the zoology category. There are over 9,000 invertebrates, ranging in size, shape, and color from all over the world. The majority of these are dried specimens, but we do have some specimens preserved in fluid. The collections has coral specimens from every ocean except the Arctic. There are a large number of snails, divided into land snails, freshwater snails, and sea snails. Other mollusks include freshwater mussels, saltwater bivalves, and cephalopods, which refers to squid, octopus, cuttlefish, or nautilus. Additionally, there are echinoderms, and these are a group of marine animals recognizable by their radial symmetry, like starfish, sea urchins, sand dollars, and sea cucumbers. And there's also crustaceans, mainly various species of crab. With so many specimens in this category, we have quite a few that are on the endangered species list. Here we have a rare red lace coral specimen collected from Japan. These coral specimens are all listed as threatened. The donut coral, the elkhorn coral, staghorn coral, and pillar coral. We have some freshwater mussels and snails listed on the endangered list as well. The dromedary pearly mussel, native to the Tennessee and Cumberland river systems. The freshwater pearl mussel, found in Europe and the northeastern United States. The Higgins eye pearly mussel, found in the upper Mississippi River system, including around St. Louis. And two mussels native to Missouri, the Neosho mucket and the sheep-nosed mussel. These freshwater mussel specimens and snail specimens have been identified as critically endangered. The Gulf moccasin shell, native to Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. The ring pink mussel, native to parts of the eastern and southeastern U.S., and this grouping of different Oahu tree snail species, which are found only in Hawaii. The collections also contain some invertebrate specimens that are considered rare, like this extra large specimen of the true tulip sea snail. Another example is this tiny shell belonging to a baby octopus known as the knobby argonaut, with an example of an adult shell here for comparison. The majority of the insects in the collections consist of butterflies and moths. The Science Center has over 1,500 butterflies and moths from all over the world. Every continent except Antarctica is represented. There are specimens commonly found on each continent, as well as some exotic and rare specimens. This wide variety in the collections helps to illustrate how diverse and fascinating the world's population of butterflies and moths truly is. It also provides scientists and researchers with a vital resource of specimens to study. Additionally, the Science Center has another 500 or more specimens of insect that include examples of grasshoppers and crickets, cicadas, beetles, spiders, bees, dragonflies, walking sticks, leaf insects, and scorpions, as well as a healthy collection of insect nests. These specimens here are examples of butterflies and moths in our collections, which are found right here in Missouri. The monarch butterfly, the Luna moth, the spicebush swallowtail, and the common buckeye. These specimens here are examples of some of the most rare butterflies and moths in the world and are placed high atop the endangered species list. The blue morpho, the Kaiser eye hind butterfly, the question mark butterfly, the purple emperor, the Richmond birdwing, the atlas moth, the garden tiger moth, and the death's head hawk moth, named for the skull-like pattern on its back. Other insects in the collection, like this giant emperor scorpion, are also endangered. It is one of the largest scorpions in the world, native to the rainforests and savannas of West Africa. Although they look horrifyingly creepy, they are known for their docile behavior and almost harmless sting that's not lethal to humans. As a result, they've become a popular scorpion in the pet trade, which has led to over-collecting in the wild and their status as an endangered species. Did you know that one of the oldest organized scientific disciplines is ornithology, or the study on birds? The collections has about 550 preserved bird specimens and nearly 600 bird eggs. Since there are so many different types of birds, they've been organized into different groups by type within ornithology and also in the collections. There's a group of waterfowl, like ducks, swans, and geese, a group of hummingbirds and swifts, those tiny fast-flying birds, shorebirds, a group that lives near water like the Caspian tern, plover, and gulls. Storks, herons, and vultures form a group, the birds with long necks, beaks, and feet without webbing. Pigeons and dodos, a group which includes both extinct and living species. Diurnal birds of prey, a group of birds active in the daytime like hawks and eagles. Domestic birds and hunting fowl form a group with chickens, turkeys, ptarmigan, quail, pheasant, and partridge. Cranes and rails are another group. Perching birds form a large group and include warblers, starlings, meadowlarks, swallows, sparrows, crows, and more. The woodpecker group includes birds that tend to nest in trees, like the woodpecker, flicker, toucan, and sapsucker. Parrots form a separate group and include species like the parakeet and cockatoo as well. We also have a small group of penguins and a nice-sized group of owls. These bird examples here are some familiar friends native to Missouri that you can see in your own backyard. We also have a few examples of the more rare species of bird found in the collections. The kagu, found only in the dense mountain forests of New Caledonia, an island group in the Pacific. An albino purple martin, a rare variation that's not seen regularly. And the sapphire-vented puffleg, a species of hummingbird found only in a few South American countries. Most people alive today have never seen this bird in the wild. This is the passenger pigeon, and it went extinct over 100 years ago in 1914. When Europeans first arrived here in North America, there were between 3 and 5 billion passenger pigeons east of the Rocky Mountains. Just over 400 years later, what was once one of the largest bird populations in the world became extinct. It is important to preserve specimens like this and the other zoological specimens you have seen because they are important sources of biological data for scientists. These specimens also help us to understand biodiversity, evolution, population genetics, and the environmental impacts affecting the planet's animal life. Osteology is the scientific study of bones, both human and animals. Osteologists, those who study bones, look at the structure of bones, skeletal elements, teeth, morphology, function, disease, pathology, the process of ossification, and the hardness of bones. In the zoology category, we have about 300 different bones, skulls, and skeletons from a variety of animals. Mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibians, and crustaceans all help tell a story about the developmental biology of animals, adaptations, diet, and more. For today's tour, I have a special guest joining me to talk more about bones, specifically some of the skulls in the Science Center's collection, and taking a more in-depth look at these. So I'd like to introduce Mike Dawson, Conservation Education Liaison from the St. Louis Zoo, and he's here today to look at some of these wonderful bones. So Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
So bones can really tell us a lot about an animal, can't they?
They can. They can give you a pretty good idea of what they eat in the wild, what their predators may or may not be, how they eat in the wild, how they may hunt, and some of their other senses that they use to keep alive.
What are a few key characteristics or areas of the skull that could maybe help us identify what animal it belonged to?
Sure. So one of the first things I typically look at on any skull is I look at the dentition of the teeth. And that gives you a pretty broad idea of what type of animal it might be. The other areas I always look at is the shape of it. The size and shape gives you an idea sometimes of what it's going to be. I mean, if you take all the muscles off and the tissues off, sometimes the size deceives you a little bit, but the shape of it gives you a pretty good idea. Some of the other things you're going to be looking for, they're called processes, so some of the things on bones that stick out. So for example, I'll pick up a piece of this lion skull here. If you look at any of these, anything that sticks out, they're called processes. This is the postorbital process, so behind the eye right here. That gives you an idea where muscle attachment might be. If there's crest or ridges or things like that, those are things that give you a pretty good idea of where some of the muscles and how big those muscles might be, and that gives you an idea. The other thing you're going to look for are a lot of the different holes. So you have a hole like right here, and these are for nerve cords, and sometimes they might be for muscles, but a lot of the smaller ones are for nerves and things that run in and out. Large one right here, these are muscles that go through here, and they connect to the lower jaw, and that's going to tell you the size and the shape of these, gives you an idea of what they're eating sometimes, or at least where the power might be in their mouth. Another area they might want to look at is the placement and orientation of the eyes, whether they're pointed sideways or forwards.
Can you tell from a skull if the animal was male or female?
You can sometimes tell. It's one of the hardest things to tell. A lot of animals are sexually dimorphic, which means a lot of them will have differences, and sometimes they're behavioral, sometimes they're morphological, and you can see some of those on skulls, but not always. And so if you happen to be an animal like this over here, you can see that this animal has large horns, and so typically on some animals, some males may have horns and the females may not, and so you may be able to tell based on something like that. Sometimes the teeth, so for example, if you were looking at a zebra, male zebras have canines, females do not, and so they may possess something that a male or female does not, so it kind of gives you a clue. Sometimes size. but you have to have a whole bunch of them to compare. And so sometimes if you have a bunch of the same species of skulls, the larger ones, depending on the species, because it's not always true for every species, but you may have an idea that's probably a female. A couple of other examples for differences between sexes, if you can try to determine if it's male or female. I mentioned some of the secondary sex characteristics, and it could be antlers, it could be things like that, or size. And here's a good example on here, the mule deer. And you can see actually the antler buds right here, where the antlers would grow from. And so you're looking for things like that. If it was a female, it would be completely smooth and round.
Okay.
Or if you're looking for something like this is a gorilla skull, if you tilt it up a little bit, this gives you a really good idea that this is an adult male gorilla, and you can see the huge sagittal crest.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it, and both male and female sometimes will have a sagittal crest, but females is smaller or somewhat absent. But the muscle attached here is what gives that male, the silverback, that huge look of the dome.
Okay.
And they also use this as mock biting, so sometimes they need a little bit of more bite for protection. And so you also see a bigger ridge around the face, and it makes the face itself look a little larger.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can see those on males versus females. Here's an orangutan that also has a pretty good sagittal crest, so if you were comparing a bunch of them, the males would have a larger one. And that's the same for chimpanzees. How this one is a good example. Smooth, this would definitely be a female.
Okay.
It would not be a male, or a very, very, very young male, but most likely it's a female.
That's very interesting. Why are there so many different holes in the skull?
If you think of it in this way, they're adaptations. And one of the things that it gives you an idea of what you're looking at and how it may eat and where the power is in its mouth and its bite. This is a great example right here. So this hole right here, if you take a look, and I'll bring the bottom jaw up and you articulate it, what's going to happen in this skull, there we go. When you articulate the skull, if you picture in your mind different muscle groups, and so what brings that jaw up and down, there's two major muscle groups, and there's a muscle called the temporalis muscle, which is going to attach from here, reaches down here, holds on this little piece, and there's a muscle down here. The bigger the opening, the bigger the muscle group can be. And so it gives you an idea of if it's really big, if you have a big temporalis muscle, it means that the bite force is going to be stronger in the front. Because that particular one, the way it pulls it up, it pulls the front up really tight. Okay. Down here, this muscle that comes down on this side, that's actually going to make the bite tighter against the back of the teeth. So right now, if you look at this, this is a lion, and we know a lion's a carnivore. So it's going to want most of its power right here on these front teeth, because it's going to bite. And it's going to need some power to tear, but it's going to need most of the power in the front. So we'll put him back here. If you were to look at a different animal, let's compare the opening. So if you go to an omnivore, here's a black bear. It still has a very strong bite, but it's not going to be as strong as something like this animal that's taking down a very large prey. And so the opening's a little narrower. Okay. However, this muscle down here is actually probably a little bigger. So it has the power to grind stuff. And if you look at its teeth, it definitely has different kinds of teeth. So the adaptations usually go together.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. Is there anything about a skull that can maybe tell us how old the animal was when it died?
There's lots of things to look for without doing different types of major testing. There's some visual things you can look for that give you indication whether it's really young or a little old. And some of the first things that I look for are suture lines.
Okay.
And so now sometimes when skulls are old and brittle, you might see the suture lines, but typically in an older, more mature, and this, I'll go back to this one's really good. If you look at a lot of the sutures, they're starting to fuse together. So as you're an older animal, those suture lines between the bones that make up the cranium will fuse. If you're a younger animal, a lot of times some of these, and you can see they're glossier on these older animals. As you get younger, you can make a judgment call. When you start seeing different suture lines that are more visible, it might be a little bit younger animal because they haven't fused yet. The other great place to look, and we can look through some of these, is to look for teeth.
Okay.
So since most mammals basically have deciduous teeth, and so usually a lot of them we have two sets. So you have your milk teeth that fall out just like we do, and so sometimes you'll see the tooth coming up and erupting. So if you're looking at a skull and you see teeth coming up, it's probably a young one who hasn't got all of his teeth yet. So those are some. The other ones you can look for, and canines are a good thing to look for. Let me see if I can find one. What you're looking for is gum recession. So this one also is a good example. You already have broken teeth here. But you look for lines and things where the gum used to be, and as you get older and older, that line goes up higher and higher. Oh. So you can look for different things on the teeth that might give you an indication. This elephant skull is a good example. So sometimes you look at, number one, this guy is missing a tooth, so it's probably pretty old. Elephants get more than 2 sets of teeth, so they get repeating sets. But you can tell some of the bones around the jaw and areas that it's old and it's pitted. And so those are some things you can look for.
Okay, great. So why do some animals have more bone around the eye orbit than others?
So a lot of it has to do with protection of the eye orbit. Okay. And so depending on, we'll go to a wolf skull. So depending on how strong your bite is and where those muscles are attached, so what you're going to notice in this one is pretty good size, but not as big as a lion. And so the process right here, right in between there when it's alive, had cartilage. Okay. And so that does give some protection. If the muscles down here and the ones pulling against behind the eye and around the retina are really strong, you're going to want more and more process, or eventually an entire fused bone. So if you look at animals, and they're a good example, I'll come over here. Primates are a good example. The way our eyes have been positioned, they're completely surrounded, and plus we use our eyes quite a bit. If you were to look at a lot of the hoof stock, this one has become completely enclosed, and if you were to have the bottom jaw, the way it comes up underneath, this protects it. So as that jaw, especially animals that chew and grind and move that bottom jaw a little bit back and forth, it protects the eye area and the retina from being moved too much.
Okay. Are there parts of the skull that would tell us if this animal has developed maybe some sensory adaptations?
Yeah, so some of the things I always look for when I'm trying to identify a skull or just to get a better idea is I typically shoot for 2 areas. So one, I look at the nasal passage. And so one of the things you're looking for, and we'll pick, let me just pick something completely different here. Here we go, we'll just pick a primate. So pick a primate, and you look at the skull itself, and there's lots of areas to look at. Here's your brain case. So there's your size of your brain. Here is the nasal passage. And if you take a look, there's the eyes, pretty large. This area is, nasal area is about this big. And you know how well humans can smell. Yeah. So you got about that. And if you were to pick an animal, let's do a comparison. Let's come down here. Let's take a raccoon. Take a raccoon. So its brain case is back this area. And so this gives us an idea. Here's the nasal passage. It's going to run from here to here. So a little bit bigger. And if you look inside there, you can see the tiny bones. They're called turbinate bones. And what's on those when it's alive is you have olfactory cells. And they sit on that, and it's vascular, so a lot of blood vessels go in there, and it increases the surface area. So the bigger in comparison to the brain case and some of the eye orbit areas gives me an idea that this guy has a great sense of smell. Yeah. So if you were to compare, for example, we all know that cats and dogs smell well. So if you take something like, we'll pick something a little bit different. We'll pick, what's this one, a mountain lion. And we compare a mountain lion to, we'll pick a canid, so we'll do a gray wolf. If you look, both of them have a good sense of smell. However, one has a better one. So if you look, this one, here's the brain case, brain's back here. Here's the nasal organ area in comparison. This guy is a little bit bigger. So typically canines have a better sense of smell than a felid does. And if you look, the trade-off is bigger eye orbits. These guys typically use their eyes more often over their sense of smell, whereas a canine uses the smell over its eyes. And so usually there's reduced eyesight, or at least eye size, and relevation to the nose area. Okay, very interesting. So we do have an example of a marsupial skull. So what about this marsupial skull would be different as compared to some of the other skulls here? Different mammals have very distinct things that just help you pop out that that's what group it belongs to. And marsupials typically always have something, whether you're in Australia or possum in our country, is the constriction. And so if you look at the constriction, here's the brain case, and you go up to the eye and it's pretty even. If you go here, it's usually really tight around the eye. So if you think of the skull, you got the rostrum, the front of your nose going up, and it constricts really tight right in the middle. So we'll pull this out here. There we go, you can take a good look. So typically the constriction is really tight here, and that just has to do with the eye and its adaptations of muscles, but it's very distinct. If you were to compare all other mammals, marsupials typically have a very tight constriction there. So visually from the top, I can usually tell you without even looking at the teeth and teeth count or something like that, that this is definitely going to be a marsupial of some species. Wow, that's awesome. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today and helping us learn more about some of the skulls in our collections. This has been very fascinating. Well, thank you for inviting me and this opportunity to take a look at all the skulls in your collection. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining me for this virtual tour of collections, looking more closely at the zoology category.
I also want to say a special thank you to the St. Louis Zoo's Mike Dawson for coming and providing a more in-depth look at some of the bones and skulls in our collections. If you're interested to see more of the collections, consider joining me on an in-person theme tour of the collection storage area when we're able to do so again. Tours are offered just for Science Center members each year to come behind the scenes with me. Until then, be sure to look out for more virtual tours of collections coming in the near future.